Thanks for joining Win Loss Week. We're super excited about this session. I want to introduce you to our panel today that's going to speak on why most win-loss programs fail and what to do about it. And hosting the panel today is going to be Mackey. He's the CEO of SCIP, which stands for Strategic and Competitive Intelligence Professionals. And then also joining us on the panel is Randy Brown, the CMO of Chief Outsiders, Lee Chesley, the VP of Marketing at Longbow Advantage, and Brian Weiner, the Director of Sales at Higher Logic. Thanks, guys. We're excited to have you on this panel with us.
Trenton.
Thank you.
Folks, I'll plug out here and let Cam go. Sorry, Cam, to interrupt you. Okay.
Thanks, Trenton. Thanks, folks, for taking a few minutes to watch this session. Now, to set the stage a little bit, win-loss. Hopefully, if you're watching this, you're a little bit of a believer or at least interested in learning more. It can be a really powerful tool to uncover the truth about why buyers are purchasing your products or services, or actually why they're not. So it's not an academic exercise, though. Acting on these insights makes a tangible difference in your business. As you've probably heard throughout Win-Loss Week, some of those benefits can be improved sales, better marketing investment, innovation product investment, and also strategic alignment. So let's peel back that buzzword, strategic alignment. We're going to talk today about why win-loss fails. And spoiler alert, a lot of the reasons have to do with underlying organizational and cultural factors. So technology is great. It's great to have the right questions that you ask your customers and prospects, but win-loss often dies on stakeholder management, working closely with senior management before, during, and after win-loss. Because if you don't have that support, that engagement, and that buy-in, win-loss won't succeed. So today, we're going to tackle three different challenges that are commonly encountered in doing win-loss. The first one, we're going to look at organizational failures. So this could be the classic, do you have that senior level champion or sponsor? How do you manage through turf wars, things like that. So second area we're going to dig into is failures of planning and prioritization. So we all want to do it all, of course, but if we don't really place our bets and prioritize where we spend our time and money, we're going to boil the ocean. And then lastly is communication. It's great that you did this amazing, awesome win-loss project, but if you don't get those insights into the right hands so they can actually act upon them, it's all for naught. So organization, planning, prioritization, and communication. That's our agenda for today. So we're going to kick off by looking at organizational failures, and Lee would love to tee you up first. So our question is this: one of the toughest parts of win-loss is getting that executive sponsor and also, buy-in from the different executive stakeholders. So, everyone, Randy, Lee, Brian, you guys are all crazy busy, and everyone is wanting time on your calendar, money, et cetera. So what do you need to hear? I'll start with Lee from an executive, CMO perspective, to want to get behind a win-loss program?
Yeah. So my background has typically been in high growth SaaS B2B world. So what I've seen is a lot of times people think win-loss, especially kind of when you're speaking up to stakeholders, that it's a CRM exercise. And that if you can just get the sales team putting data into CRM, well, we can pull all this data out and now we've solved the problem. So I think an internal exercise with all the stakeholders and in the C-suite around what does win-loss mean for our company, for our organization? What are the goals and the anticipated outcomes? And then how will we use that data? Or how, and it's beyond CRM, right? I mean, folks have been hearing this throughout close. So it's beyond just getting data into the CRM. And then I think the hardest piece that I found is, are you committed to believing the data and using the data, right? So I think it can it sounds logical to do some sort of win-loss program, but then when you get down into it, and I think you really start having those stakeholder conversations around what does it really mean for our company? And are we committed to this program? I think asking those questions before you get started are just super important.
Love that, Lisa. Really having that conversation. So you just explain, what it is, what it can do for us. And I love that whole notion of being committed to actually believing the data, because there's probably a tendency just to hear the good stuff and forget everything else, right?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, we all want to believe that that the thing that we're building, that we're super committed to, is is great and is making the world a better place. And, to a large degree, hopefully that's true, but we're also all, hopefully committed to continuing to do better. And so if you don't go at it with that mindset of we're going to hear things that might not be what we expected or might be a little hard to hear, but hopefully next time or, in a year from now, we're not hearing those same things, right? And so you need to have that growth mindset.
Yeah, that's great. So Brian, your perspective here is running a sales team where it's, obviously you advocate for, the customer, the overall health of the business, but, you and your teams have those revenue goals, every single month that, that Trenton mentioned. So for you, what kind of, what do you need to get behind a win-loss program to really, as Lee said, believe in the insights? What's the hook for you?
Yeah, great question. And I'd say as a sales leader, it's really easy to get behind a program, right? I've seen a ton of success and strategic insights gathered from win-loss programs. I've also seen them fail very quickly as well. So where I tend to look towards is more the process. How do we operationalize this? How do we make it a very efficient and repeatable process? I think everything that Lee said is right. And I think that a lot of times we jump to the end goal without thinking about how we're going to get there. And that's, I think, why a lot of these fail at the end is before we jump to what we're going to gather from it, how we're going to leverage the insights, what we're going to do with it, let's figure out a really easy process so we can repeat it. And more importantly, institutionalize the information. So before we can even analyze it, we have to make sure it's getting into the right hands and the right places. And so when you think about the scope of the project, a lot of times it can get really, really wide. I think we touched on boiling the ocean, and we really want to start with a very specific scope, very narrow, so we can build and learn from it. And then we can scale and get to the point where Lee is at, where we can actually gather information and then bring all those stakeholder groups together.
That's great. And so it's, you're speaking my language. You kind of sound like a Six Sigma black belt there, so much process, but it's a good point, right? If win-loss is this thing you do once every few years, it's hard to really benefit from it the most. Randy, your perspective is really diverse. You've been a CMO, you've run P&Ls, you've run product management. So, from your perspective across all those functions, especially working in manufacturing where, everyone's overburdened and margins are often thin, what do you need to see to get behind and really champion a win-loss project that might ruffle feathers?
Well, I love the question, right? So, and having had that kind of holistic background, both running global sales and marketing organizations and also sitting on the executive leadership teams. What I found personally is that being able to speak in the financial lingo and connect from a financial linkage is a significant benefit. Actually, viewing the executive leadership of the company kind of as a customer. And so, if you think about how the executive team's thinking and what they're talking about in executive meetings, they're typically a lot of the time talking about sustainable, profitable growth, right? And so in terms of financial metrics, that links to EBITDA. So, the EBITDA metric, and also the return on invested capital, or how you're utilizing your cash. So I think one of the secrets and where I've been able to be successful when I was early in my marketing and my sales career was to be able to actually relate discussions and actions and initiatives that we're taking. When we talk about sales process, like Brian spoke about, or Lay spoke about CRM, how does that actually have an impact on driving organic growth in the business and profitably doing it? So that's for me, like an extremely important thing is the linkage to financials.
That's great, man. So I think, between, Randy, Lee, and Brian, it's kind of neat. Brian really talked much about the how, so what's the process to do it? So it's not just a one and done to make sure that, you're setting achievable goals. Randy, you really focused very much on the why, so speaking the executive's language, it's great that you can tell executives, hey, doing this, we might increase our satisfaction by X number. That's great. They like it, but, money talks, especially with the C-suite. And then Lee, I really like, your comments there. It's really scoping out what this thing is first, because it's so easy to kind of, go into a room and assume that everyone knows what win-loss is. And if you don't really do that level setting, you could have some executives walk out and think, oh, we can do win-loss. We have that check the box in our CRM system. So yeah, those are really, really good insights. And I probably imagine each of those could be its own session. So thanks guys for that. So Brian, I'm going to pick on you next, and going back to sales, just so often, I've worked in my career with sales folks who are just amazing, and they are passionate, and they can be a little bit protective sometimes of the relationships they've developed with their customers. Sometimes though, that passion can turn into almost like territorialism, and that can be a barrier for win-loss. So have you seen that in your career? Any of the sales kind of saying, hands off, that's my customer, or I can tell you don't need to talk to them? You seen that, and any tips on getting around that?
Yes, I mean, in short, 100%. I've definitely seen the level of territorialism there. I think for me, where I've seen success in ensuring, or at least trying to mitigate some of that, is communication. It goes back to what we said in the first part. It's the why behind it. We're not doing this to attack anybody or get anybody out of the organization. We're here to learn and grow, right? So this is a learning exercise. It's not, for lack of a better term, a witch hunt, right? So in any type of change management, anytime you're bringing something new to a team, it's about positioning. And so I think the communicating up front, the why behind it, what the goal of this is. Again, this isn't just a sales issue or concern, but actually the organization as a whole benefits from it. So it's a great way to connect all of the different teams and work cross-functionally. From a sales perspective, I think there just tends to be a negative connotation from win-loss. They don't hear the win side, they hear the loss, right? So when it's that last word, it should be loss-win, because when you come away from that, it's immediately thinking it's negative. Why did we lose? What did I do wrong? So for me, I mean, I think what we've done to help get that buy-in and grow with the group is just simply say, look, we're going to learn from this, but we're also going to focus on why we're winning. And I know that I'm sure Lee and Randy can speak to that a little further, but what are we doing well? I think starting on that side, getting more buy-in, it's more of a snowball effect. Then you can start to look at how we've figured out from a competitive standpoint or from marketing, et cetera. So I think just trying to bring the team together and understand that this is an exercise to grow and improve and put more money in our pockets typically gets more buy-in. But again, the people that are more territorial around the accounts, I think it's about really understanding why they feel that way and how we can sort of communicate the value of what this program will be to them.
Love it. Lee, Randy, any thoughts on Brian's comments about starting with why? All apologies to Simon Sinek there.
I thought your point about focusing on why we win first is huge. I mean, I also think too, as organizations, we probably don't do enough of celebrating our product team wins. I mean, we celebrate when big releases come out and things like that, but I think that's also an opportunity to really celebrate the product teams and the dev teams who don't get the glory that oftentimes they really deserve. And so especially if you can get their buy-in by starting with why we win and talking about the product oriented reasons around that, and having transparent conversations, like you said, with the sales team about here's why we win, and let's start with celebrating the successes, and then let's talk about some of the other things too. I thought that was a really good point.
Yeah, and I would add, so there's a lot of content out that's been recently published, especially in this arena of collaboration. And so when I relate it to what Lee and Brian have said, right, about process, so you have sales management process and marketing process, and then Lee's initial comment on CRM, you have this whole digital technology arena, right, that's transforming a lot of the way that we use those processes to go to market. So when you think of those things in the context of collaboration, I just see huge opportunity for collaboration between sales and marketing, utilizing process and digital transformation or digital technology tools, right, to really step change the success we have. And so like, I'll just pick one example, like ABM, right? So activity-based marketing. This is a huge collaboration between leveraging market intelligence and customer intelligence and working with the sales team collaboratively to win together. And so I think that's a real emerging arena, and that's a big opportunity to have a lot of impact in the business.
I love that. And I like this whole thought about collaboration, right? I feel like, win-loss, at its worst, to Lee's point about, there's that field in CRM, and, the kind of the conventional wisdom is win-loss. You ask a salesperson, why'd you lose the deal? Oh, it was price. Why'd you win the deal? I'm the greatest salesperson in the world. And
Never
so
I've never seen that. I've never seen
right?
that.
But in all seriousness, though, this idea of collaboration, have you seen win-loss be a tool to kind of encourage that? Whether ABM, I guess, is another example for Randy. But have you seen this kind of help focus the organization, not just the individual or the department? Have you seen that happen? Any of you?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and look, there's a lot of forced collaboration cross-functionally, especially in this virtual world, right? Like,
Sure.
it's really easy to say, let's work together, let's do this. But I think that outside of the company's success, which is hard as sometimes to quantify where each individual fits into that, this is a very specific initiative that everybody can benefit from, right? And it really does force that department to work with sales and vice versa. So you have to build that piece around it, that process, where everyone feels like they're contributing. And frankly, the more you put in, I mean, it's an overused phrase, but the more you get out of it. If everyone does align around the plan that we have talked about, and everyone is working towards that shared goal, then ultimately everyone may take a slightly different benefit or win from it, but we're all going to learn something. And I think that it's all about just moving the collective organization forward. Whether it is, you may have great salespeople, you may have really poor salespeople and a great product, but we have to at least quantify what that is and understand it, so then we can make the correct decisions going forward.
And I think for me too, on the marketing side, it forces more of a thoughtful process for us around where does product marketing sit, and what does that function actually do at your organization, because that title means something different basically everywhere you go. Are they more messaging and externally campaign focused, or are they customer focused, or are they market focused? And so I think from a product and marketing perspective, it can really help you align, because you're having those conversations, and you can get the most out of that product marketing function because you're forcing the alignment regardless of where that role sits.
That's got to be important. Is organizations with the best intentions, you have dotted lines, matrices, matrices within a matrix, and it gets complicated. So I like that. I mean, so just talking about product marketing specifically. So maybe with that, Randy, I'm going to ask you a little bit about prioritization, and this is something Brian brought up a moment ago. So we don't have endless time and endless budgets as much as we all wish we did. And like any project, win-loss needs to focus, especially at the beginning, if the company doesn't have a proof point with it yet. So as you're thinking about where at the C-suite level you want to prioritize that investment from a time and dollar perspective, how do you start to think about where, is it, the cash cow, what are your thoughts about where to prioritize where the win-loss is done?
It's such an important question. If one word comes to mind around that question, it's bandwidth. Every single company that I've worked for in my career, we always have a resource bandwidth issue, right? And it comes back to exactly the point of prioritization. So, when I link that to actually a lot of the comments we've heard are already here, and I love Lee's point, and so Brian's point on process, Lee's point she just made on what's the role, right, in the business. So I've had the most success leading marketing and general management in businesses when we start with insights about the market first and understand attractive kind of market segments and where we want to play and where we don't want to play. And from that activity, you come up with and it's typically a pretty long list of strategic hypotheses on where we want to play. And this is the beginning of starting to force prioritization in the business. And a lot of times companies go right to the tactical marketing activities and sales activities without doing that insight work. So there's a lot of inefficiency baked in there when you do it that way. So if you start with insights, you come up with a lot of hypotheses, and then we move that into the strategy development process. That's back to process, right? So I take all these long lists of strategic hypotheses, and now I try to drive those to like 3 to 5, what we call growth levers. That's what we're going to focus on, driving organic growth. And that links back to my first point when we started the conversation on financial linkage, right? So how are we going to drive EBITDA and return on invested capital in this business? So now I've got a few target growth levers, and then that sets all my prioritization and the entire organization. It sets organization alignment, funding, resource allocation, prioritization. And so that's how you execute really efficiently. And so you can tell I have a real passion for it, because I've seen a massive amount of inefficiency in businesses because they do not prioritize. And so I think when you solve that prioritization issue, your bandwidth, challenges start to really decrease, because you're really focused on the most important things that are going to add value and grow the business.
I love it, because you can't do it all as much as we all wish you could. And so Randy, you mentioned marketing there, and having been fortunate to spend time with CMOs for a while in my career, Lee's in an impossible position where, she and her team, there's the, whole area of like strategic marketing and, strategic hypotheses and all that fun stuff, and, market insights. And then there's the whole realm of, bringing that to life and execution and tactical marketing. So, Lee, you have the mandate to do both. It's kind of an all the above for marketing. Good luck with it. How do you prioritize where to do a win-loss?
Well, I think, Randy, you said something that really stuck with me, which was defining what you're not going to do, which to me, I think is almost more important than what you are going to do, or the command intent. I mean, thinking about, whether it's the fiscal year or however you want to break it down, kind of in that way, I think that to me has been probably the best mindset shift that I've had throughout my career, is just understanding what we're not going to do and feeling comfortable saying no, because a no to something is a yes to something else, right? So the more I can say no, the more I can say yes to the right things. And so I think then within that is understanding, are there markets that are emerging for us where maybe we don't have the data, and that we believe it's a large growth opportunity, and so we need to get that data. Are there customers that are just really killing us right now? And competitors that are really killing us right now, and we don't know why. Did we scale up the sales organization significantly? And we need to make sure that, we've done enablement that's proliferating, or we've, put some new campaigns in play. And so I think understanding where your organization is. So I guess, Cam, my answer is it depends. But understanding kind of where your organization is, where the challenges and the opportunities are, and then saying, okay, if we choose these two things to focus on, we're all comfortable saying, and you kind of do like the look in the eye, we're not doing all of these other things, right? And then being able to have those conversations to remind folks that if priorities start to shift, then you're saying yes to something else and no to something that you'd originally agreed on.
One of the most frustrating but probably best professional traits that I've encountered in my career is when you ask someone to do something and they're like, absolutely, but I'm not going to be able to do this, or this will take 2 weeks longer. It's so smart, because it recognizes, you say, Lee, that we can't do it all. And I really like what you and Randy have couched, because I think it just underscores the message that this is so important to look before you leap, that before, a product marketer says, we got to do a win-loss, it's, there has to be that dialogue amongst senior management to develop those hypotheses and, and the prioritizations. Because if you're a product marketing director or a director of competitive intelligence, that's not for you to decide those things for the organization. Your job is to bring the insights to inform the decisions. So yeah, it just underscores the importance of the organization at this level, the head of sales, marketing, product management, to really think about the strategy prioritizations before jumping into win-loss. So
Cam, can I add something real quick?
Yeah, Brian, yeah, go for it, man.
And I think setting expectations up front is really important. I mean, this is by no means a quick thing that we're talking about here, right? I mean, there's process, talking to stakeholders, understanding the why behind it, executing it. Then you actually have to do it. And then there's actually reviewing and understanding what that is. So I think the point I'm making is when you think about prioritization, there also has to be acceptance that priorities may change over time. Once you have the opportunity not just to analyze the results of the interviews and derive something from that, there should be some overlay with the existing data sets you have in your CRM to identify any underlying trends. So you may, on the surface, come from the interviews and say, well, we're just getting killed by this competitor X. But actually, after you look at it and you dig deeper in the interviews, you may find, well, maybe we're not differentiating properly, or maybe it's something in our presentation that isn't bringing through. So there's so many layers to this that take time and probably years to really effectively derive the right amount of information so you can correctly plan for the future. So anyone that comes in to say, we're just going to do this, we're going to come out of it, and then we're going to have all this great information, you're just incorrectly setting expectations. And again, prioritization is important up front so you know where to start, but you may have to branch off and do something different once you get deeper into it.
Yeah, so I want to pick up on that because I think it's a really great point. And you have to prioritize up front, but it's right on, man. You got to be able to be flexible and pivot because you might find something that you didn't expect. Either, as you say, maybe the differentiation isn't there in the market, or from a marketing perspective, it could actually be a product issue, or other things. And so, sometimes win-loss, you find these things and either you don't expect it or they can ruffle some feathers internally and make people uncomfortable. So, that's one of the great burdens of being a leader is that, sometimes we deliver that difficult message and sometimes, as Brian mentioned, change management, often that really, it's got to start with us. And so, Brian, asking you first, any advice for folks on acting on any of the insights that you found that maybe you didn't expect or tougher to deliver with the thought that this is the whole point of win-loss, right? Is actually changing organizational behavior.
Yeah, well, I mean, Lee touched on it at the very beginning, right? I mean, there has to be an agreement organizationally that we're going to take all this information and listen to it and hear it and act on it. So I think a part of it is attitude, right? I mean, I think we all have to come to the table and be vulnerable and be willing to give and take at the same time. So if we do ultimately find in our win-loss that this is a sales specific issue, the product is good, we're doing the right thing from a marketing perspective, but the team is not executing on X, Y, and Z, I have to be able to accept that in that group and understand that there may be other pieces of information that come out later on that are impacted by other departments. So I've always found is just coming to the table and being open to the feedback, understanding it, making sure that I'm not taking anything personally, understanding that the goal of this is to just, again, as we said at the beginning, to move the organization collectively forward and improve. I've always found by setting the right attitude up front, assuming you have a good team behind you and you've got that followership, I think you're going to see that type of attitude trickle down to other individuals that are engaging in this. The other piece I would just touch on, which I think is somewhat obvious, but we've kind of all hit on in a level, is it's looking at the insights, but it's also looking at the data that you have in your system. You have to connect the dots on those two pieces to get to the point where Randy was touching on earlier around what are the financial implications. We have to understand what the pipeline was, what the dollar value was behind that, what a perceived win rate could potentially be if we do implement some of these changes. That helps to get to where Randy is. So a lot of that, I think what I've seen in other organizations is some of that interview feedback can be taken anecdotally, even though it's specific. You can isolate it and say, well, it's just they just had a bad experience, or they just did that, or they're not using the product the correct way. But I think the more you can grow this and scale it, and you start to see, well, these 7 people all interacted with competitor X or Y, and be able to create more definition around what that feedback is, will help Lee's groups, Randy's groups, sort of act on that, go forward with it.
That's a great point. Just it's you might hear something from a specific segment or region, buyer type, whatever, and you don't want to necessarily overreact to that. So I like what you're saying, kind of triangulate it against the data that you do have. Randy, how about you? So Brian talked pretty eloquently about the the need to have that organizational agreement, and then being vulnerable to the insights, and actually so you act on them. From your perspective, what are some best practices or lessons learned for actually getting that sustainable behavior change at the organizational level?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate in my career to have the opportunity to participate in executive leadership development training, which has been a huge help for me. And so it's kind of under the leadership theme, right? And I think it revolves around culture, and it's not only at the C-suite level, but at every level in the organization. If the leadership, all those leaders can operate, with fostering a strong culture, a lot of team environment. I think, and what I mean by that is winning and also failing together, right? And learning from that, but finding a way to take those learnings and be even more successful. One of my, actually, some of my favorite roles in my career have been working for servant leadership executives, right? And so, I've learned a lot from that. I love that style because basically, it means working shoulder, right, to shoulder as a member of the team versus a hierarchical kind of driving it. I think when what I found is when I actually emulated that, not as an executive membership, executive management team leader, but actually as a marketing leader or younger in my career, I had great success with it. So, I think those kind of team, those kind of leadership skills really help foster a really great, culture, whether you're winning or you're losing, but leveraging the learnings.
I love that. I mean, it's, I think you said winning and failing together. I mean, it sets an important message. I mean, none of us is perfect, right? No person, no department, no organization. And so the more you're, transparent about that, and you celebrate the wins, but let's be honest, we face plant sometimes, and you can talk about that too without retribution. Lee, how about you? Thoughts about getting some of those hard to make changes actually through the organization?
Yeah, so I think, Brian and Randy have hit on a lot of great things, and I'm going to echo some of what they said. One is analyzing the information and being willing to, maybe change your hypothesis or have those conversations internally and pivot where you need to. But like everyone said, it's about leadership. And I think through these exercises, you also unearth some things maybe culturally that are, byproducts of doing this kind of project, which is, do teams have confidence and trust with their leaders? So more thinking about, as you're going through the data with the marketing teams, the sales teams, the product teams, and how are those conversations going? And are they open to having, open dialogues, and they know that they can have that dialogue? I think that's where you really start to see growth in the organization. You see your strong leaders emerge. And I think you can potentially unearth, are there some relationships that aren't working as well as others right now? And is it because I, as a leader, have not given them the security to say, hey, we failed here, which I think we should all be doing? Or are there other things at play? And so I think that's really probably the most important thing about a project like this. And culturally, Randy, to your point, it says a lot about the company, how successful one of these projects is.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a great point. I think one of the super powerful and frankly cool things about win-loss, or is when you do it right, and you've taken the feedback of everyone here today, is that it really can change the entire organization. It's not a, hey, this is a sales thing, a marketing thing. I mean, operations, service, sometimes finance, et cetera. And so, I mean, it's an incredibly powerful process. So for those listeners or viewers who've skipped to the end, I used to work with this guy. He would watch the first minute and then fast forward the video to the last minute. I would like to ask each of you, what's one recommendation, something that it could, be something you already shared, but the one either mindset change or specific action you would like listeners to take to overcome some of these, common barriers for win-loss around organization, communication, and prioritization. So Brian, I'm going to ask you first. What's the one action item you'd recommend for our viewers?
Well, I'll give you like 1.5 because you typed
Perfect.
made me think of something
Okay,
when you said
extra
mindset.
credit.
So I think for one, I mean, just the mindset, we've got to have a growth mindset here. I think you've got to come in with an open mind and being willing to learn whatever department you're coming from, whatever end. Otherwise, well, I think what's very clear from this conversation, this will die on the vine, it will fail, and it'll create more friction than togetherness. What I'll touch on, because I think data is so important to me in the process around it, what I would tell sales leaders is if you envision trying to create a win-loss program, or if it's something you're trying to get started with, or you're just sort of in the infancy stages, really spend your time on the CRM and working with the team. I think that there is pick one or two things, even just standardizing your close loss reasons within your database. You'd be surprised how many organizations don't have this standardized. Start there. Start with that one piece. Work with your team to at least gather this information up front. Because for one, once you get that standardized and the team starts leveraging it, you may be able to gather some very initial insights that just help you off the bat before you really go into a full-fledged program. But more importantly, if you do have this standardized, you can use these insights to help get that buy-in at the executive level and then tie it to the financial need that Randy touched on. So that would be my advice for today.
Love it. So, use what you have. That's really good, Brian. Randy, how about you next? One thing you want folks to do or think about differently?
Yeah. So I think we can all really improve our opportunities for success when my point at the beginning, when we try to link our activities back to those things that the business really is focused on, which is typically profitable, sustainable growth. How are the activities that we're focused on drive organic growth? And so I would really encourage everyone listening in to really understand more about EBITDA and return on invested capital and how activities affect that. And I'll just give a couple, simple examples. So attractive target market segments, attractive customers, right? That there's not big barriers of entry. If we know those, the things I'm doing focused on that will drive, growth in the business. And that's what goes into the strategy. And then when we're executing all the promotional marketing communication activities, the MarTech stack, right, that we're leveraging with digital technology to take that messaging to market, it's all in alignment with those things in the strategy that are going to drive growth, and a good use of your cash or your working capital. So I think, if everyone can understand what are the variables related to EBITDA and return on invested capital, and how do my activities relate to that? Wow, when you can talk in that language to the CEO of the business or the CMO or the CFO, I mean, you're really differentiating yourself and adding, I think, a different level of value.
Yep, definitely. That's going to get their attention, and Lee's going to want to write you a check much more than, hey, we should do this because I think it's a good idea. That's great, Randy. Well, Lee, how about you? Let's, if you could wrap us up, what's your one takeaway or action item for our viewers?
Yeah, sure. So I think everything that Randy and Brian has said has been great. I think one, start having the conversation. It sounds like a massive undertaking, right? So just start having the conversation and thinking about organizational buy-in, and then walk before you run. So kind of to Brian's point, what can you do today that maybe isn't super painful, especially for the sales org who's already super process, just probably buried in the CRM. And so what can you do today to start to add value so that when you start to move into larger projects and wanting to, invest some money and bring the organization together, you've shown the value and you've started to have those conversations and folks are starting to get bought in, as opposed to going in and asking, for this massive organizational shift, and you haven't even started to do what you can with what you have.
Yeah, that's great, because it's an easy thing as an executive to say no to when you haven't quantified the potential benefits in the language, like Randy says, that executives appreciate. If you haven't done a proof of concept like Lee, you and Brian have both mentioned, it's easy to say no to. But I think anyone who's gone 30 minutes in at this point, I think they've probably gotten 15 other really good ideas about how to approach this. So Brian Weiner, Lee Chesley, Randy Brown, guys, can't thank you enough. I learned a lot. Hopefully the viewers did too. And with that, I'm going to give it back to Trenton to take us home.
Thank you guys so much. This has been an amazing session, really insightful. I love the last takeaways there were probably my favorite. Brian talking about that growth mindset. We run into that a ton where people are afraid of the truth and what to do with it. I love Randy, you're talking about tying marketing to revenue. It's like a super big trending thing right now. Everyone's like, how should marketing be measured? What's the best, KPIs to have? And I'm a big believer it's tie it to revenue as deep as you can. And Lee, we always talk about that too. Like, just start. I mean, it's overwhelming, it's big, but you got to start. You got to start somewhere. So thank you guys so much. For anybody that's tuned in, if you found something useful or insightful from any of our panel speakers, please mention them on LinkedIn, talk about what they've talked about. I'm sure they would love that. And Cam, thank you tons for hosting this panel. You're always a pleasure to work with, and it's been great. Thank you guys.
It was fun. Great job, guys.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.